Welcome back. All right, so we're roughly a month out from the trade deadline. And so I wanted to talk about who I feel like should be buyers, should be sellers, and just go through it in five different categories here. Totally different from Panic Index, although the board is set up in a similar manner. The Stanley Cup magnet in this case, meaning teams that I think should go for it. That this might be the best time, or at least one of the best times to go for it. And I'm going to be doing this in terms of the standings. So going 1 through 32 by points and using Sportsnet's standings. So just throwing that out there, the standings 1 through 32 as on Sportsnet. And so we'll talk about who should buy, who should sell, and all that fun stuff. And part of this is because if you have more buyers than sellers, obviously for the team selling, your price can go up. And if you have more teams that are selling than buying, well, then the price for each asset drops, right? And I wanted to start with the buyers because that gives me a good idea once I get down into here. A lot of teams that might be buying at the deadline. Maybe there'll be more teams that are likely to sell as well. It might just be too tempting not to sell. And I'm not going to look at who's potentially on the market or anything in this. Just strictly at what each team's mentality should be or has already been. In the case of the team at the top, the Vancouver Canucks are clearly buyers. If you told me before the season the Canucks would be a team that I would think should buy at the deadline, I would have told you were crazy. I would have said either they're going to be soft sellers or stand pat and hope to make it in there. But yeah, no, they're buying. They've already picked up Lindholm. Clearly, this is a team that's going to be aggressive this year at the trade deadline. Boston, similar situation. I think they should buy. I don't know how many more years we're going to see Marchand playing at the top of his game. This is a team that has defied expectations after losing Bergeron and Krejci. And not replacing them with centers of that stature. You know, they bring in Morgan Geekie, you bring up Poitras, you bring up Beecher. Yeah, this team has no business being as good as they've been in terms of their record. So, yeah, I think they should be buyers. Colorado are buyers. I would be absolutely shocked if we don't see Colorado stocking up. Lindholm was supposed to be on their radar as well before the Canucks picked him up. It's probably part of the reason the Canucks picked him up. Other teams were circling around on him. You might as well go and get the asset you want when you want him. But I do expect Colorado to add probably a center. And, picking up Parise as an unrestricted free agent. Smart move there, but I expect a lot more. Florida. Also, yep. So Florida, go ahead. They went to the Stanley Cup final last year. This year during the regular season, they've been better than they were during the last regular season. Yep, absolutely they should be buyers. I think this is a team that has a ton of potential to win a Stanley Cup, and with the right moves at the deadline, could put themselves in that position. Dallas to me, and then the question becomes one of, so can they win the Stanley Cup? Yes. I'm just thinking, should I have them under potential buyers or should buy? I'm going to put them under should buy. So, trade deadline could be very interesting for me in particular as a hockey fan and see what Vancouver, Boston, Dallas end up doing at the deadline, whether they add or not. I would be fine. I want to say, too, I'd be fine with Dallas standing pat. There's enough good young players here and good young talent in the lineup and still yet to come up. Stankoven being a good example of that. But yeah, this is a team that has a pretty strong future, and I don't want to see them necessarily mortgage that, but at the same time, probably a buying atmosphere. Winnipeg's buying. They showed that with the Monahan deal. They're in the buying mood. Now, whether it just ends up being Monahan or if they add anybody else, we'll see. I would think there's more depth pieces they add. Monahan should be a really solid addition for them. Had a really strong month statistically with Montreal prior to the trade. And so he played well, got his value up, and Montreal gets back some pretty good pieces in that. The New York Rangers, you know what? With the Rangers, the way they were playing going into the deadline, and really, this is a pretty good team. I don't know if they should necessarily be all in. I don't know if I would put them in the category of teams that should be all in, and go for it. There's a lot of good young assets with the New York Rangers as well. And I don't know if you want to sell those off necessarily at the deadline. You can let me know as a Ranger fan if you feel like, nope, they should go all in. But the Rangers, it feels like it's sustainable. Similar to Dallas, I would say this is a team that should be good for years to come. Vegas, Vegas is going to be in that buying category. We know that the Vegas Golden Knights are a team that want more success. They want more Stanley Cups. They got their first Stanley Cup. They want the second, and I don't think they want to wait for it. So I would be very surprised if they're not aggressive at the deadline. And we may see situations where some of these teams are bidding against each other for a player's services. And then when a trade finally goes through, we're kind of gobsmacked at how much a team gets. But it's going to be because of bidding wars. First round picks, prospects, and probably roster players here and there as well. Carolina. I wouldn't put Carolina necessarily in the going all in category. I don't think they need to. I don't feel like Carolina, yes, they need a goaltender. Yep, they need a goaltender. They're not the only team that needs a goaltender. I wouldn't qualify fixing your goaltending as necessarily going all in. That's just fixing an issue with your team. So I don't think Carolina needs to make big changes up front. I don't think they need big changes on the blue line. If Pesce won't stick around, maybe he gets moved. But yeah, Carolina, I don't think they need to go all in. I don't think they need to go crazy at the deadline. The Oilers have won 16 games in a row. I think if the option, if they have a chance to buy and add at the deadline, they can. I don't think they have to either. I feel like the Oilers with 16 wins in a row, it'd be hard for me to argue they need to be really aggressive at the deadline. They're one of the best teams in the league right now, and I don't think they need to do a whole lot. So I think if the right deal is out there, you get that done. But otherwise, I could see them potentially standing pat. Tampa Bay, I'm going to put Tampa Bay under buyers. And I'm going to say why. Tampa Bay, it does feel like that window, the window's closing, the door's closing, however you want to phrase it. It does feel like for this Tampa Bay team, this may be a last chance to win at this window. And so I'd be quite surprised if Tampa Bay doesn't do what they need to add. Which brings us to Toronto. Toronto has to. It's Toronto. You have to add at the deadline. They have to bring players in. Now, I mean, last night's game went okay in parts, and there's definitely been some good games that they've lost, and yet this is a team that I think needs something. So yeah, I do expect Toronto to be all in at the deadline. You've got to remember, you've got Tavares' contract coming up next year. You've got Marner's contract coming up next year. So there's some pressure here. So while, yes, they've re-signed both Matthews as well as Nylander, there's not as much pressure and not as much of a feeling of this might be their last chance. There's still some of that there. And so I would be very surprised if Toronto's not aggressive at the deadline. Detroit, you know what? I'm going to put Detroit under stand pat. I don't think Detroit needs to do a lot, and I don't think they should. I think there's a lot of good young assets with this team. I think there might be a temptation to go out and get some rentals at the deadline on some level, but I think the best option for Detroit, stand pat, leave it as is, make changes in the offseason as necessary. But yeah, standing pat might be the best thing for them. The Kings, I would put them under potential buyers, and I say this because even though Kopitar, Doughty, getting older, and you do have some concern there, I don't think this is a team that should be going all in on the idea of winning a Stanley Cup. They have not been playing like a Stanley Cup contender. We'll see whether or not Rob Blake makes additions, but I'm going to put them under potential buyers, not necessarily under the should buy category. Philadelphia, Philadelphia is tough because going into the All-Star break, they started playing not great hockey, right? And really it could have been just that schedule was brutal. They played like 17 games in 31 days, something along those lines. So it has been a really tough schedule. I am leaning towards potential sellers with Philadelphia. And I'm saying potential as in if over the next month Philadelphia's record continues to drop off, then you might be better off looking at making a move. And you might be better off deciding to make changes. And I mean, not huge changes, not sell, but, looking at players who might be on expiring contracts and saying, well, we could let this guy go. But yeah, so we'll see what Philadelphia does going forward, but I would think potential sellers for them. St. Louis, I'm going to put them under the same category. The St. Louis Blues are in this odd spot where they're not really secured a playoff spot necessarily, and over the next month, that record's going to decide what happens, but I would say potential sellers for St. Louis. Because if you are the general manager of the Blues, do you feel like this is a year to go for it? Probably not. Probably not the year to go for it. And with the amount of teams that might be buyers, you might be better off just to see what you can get for some assets at the deadline. The Islanders, I'll put them under potential sellers as well. They did get the win last night. They don't have a problem beating Toronto, generally. The games are all close, but they won all three this year. But then outside of the games against Toronto, they have had their struggles. They've had their struggles past 60 minutes, and I think that the next couple of weeks will probably decide what Lou Lamoriello does and whether or not they're sellers at the deadline. Nashville. Oh, Nashville's a really tough one because, like, they're in a playoff spot. I don't feel like they're in a spot where they're going to necessarily want to mortgage their future. I think standing pat might be the right move for the Nashville Predators. Again, much like Detroit, maybe you wait till the offseason to make necessary moves. But, yeah, I don't think that Nashville is a team that's going to be aggressive at the deadline, and I don't think selling makes a lot of sense either. There might be an unrestricted free agent that you decide, we're going to move this guy because we don't think we're going to re-sign him. But I don't necessarily view that as selling. I view that as trying to get something for an asset you're going to lose anyways. Selling basically means, we're just going to get rid of this guy. You might bring him back later. There's certainly been cases where players get traded at the deadline by a team that's selling. That player becomes a free agent in July and ends up going right back to the team that traded him at the deadline. Bukestad comes to mind, going back to Arizona. Seattle. Seattle's a tricky one. I'm going to put them under potential sellers for a similar reason as the Islanders. It hasn't been working at the right pace. They've got a lot of points with games they've lost after 60 minutes, but yeah, it's been a tough season for Seattle. I could see them kind of selling a little bit at the deadline to try to get some future assets, maybe a couple of draft picks, something that'll help for seasons going forward. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh. What are you doing? So you've got all the veterans there. You've got Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Carlson, right? So you're not going to be a flat-out seller. But if you don't sell at all at the deadline in your Pittsburgh, you're going to make your fans angry, especially if they don't make the playoffs, right? Stand pat just seems wrong. Buying seems wrong, but you know what? I could see it. I could see Pittsburgh kind of a buy of sorts at the deadline. I could see them trying to bring in an asset. And I could see, if Jake Gensel ends up leaving town, I could see that being a trade where they try to get a piece back that's going to help him right now. I don't think Gensel would get moved in a deal just for draft picks and prospects. I don't feel like that's where Kyle Dubas is at. That may change over the next month, but I don't see it now. But yeah, Pittsburgh's definitely a tough call. So we'll keep an eye on that. But it does feel like maybe they're going to be buyers. New Jersey, they need a goaltender, but does that qualify as buying? No. And to me, New Jersey is a good young team. If they're not going to make it this year, I think keeping it mostly as is probably the right call. I know this may frustrate some Devils fans, but I still feel like there's a really good team there in New Jersey. It's a team that with the right moves could be a contender, could still end up being a dark horse come playoff time. And I don't think, outside of that next goaltender that they clearly need, I don't think that they need to add a whole lot. Maybe a little bit of depth here and there, but nothing major. Washington, I'm going to put them under potential sellers, although personally, I think selling is probably the best way to go for them at this point in time. But they're staying close enough to the playoff chase that I'm not going to put them under the sell category just yet. I feel like that for Washington, you've got Ovechkin, you got a very veteran-laden lineup. It might be tough to just sell off at this point in time. It's something you might have to sit down and talk to Ovechkin about as well, right? Arizona, I don't think this is the year for Arizona, and I think where they've got assets that they've appreciated and value playing for the Coyotes, you trade them at the deadline for a good return. Coyotes have got very good at this. Really, it's like they're one of those house flipping shows where they get the fixer upper and they fix it up and then they sell it up and then they make more money. And it feels like for the Coyotes, that's what they do with their assets. Now, if they can get an arena that way too, great. So we just traded our arena for another one. I don't know. That's Arizona State's problem now. We sold their arena. Anyways, don't care if we're not legally allowed to do it. Anyways, for the Coyotes, I would have them underselling. Calgary, you know what? I'm going to have Calgary underselling, but I'm going to say this. It does feel like you look at the Lindholm deal, that's not a flat out just sell because they picked up Kuznetsov, and if Kuznetsov's scoring picks up in Calgary, then it's probably a soft this year production wise, and they've added assets for the future. So I'm going to put them under sell because I do think Tanev probably goes, Hannafin probably goes, but I don't know if it's going to be just futures they get back. They're still close enough in the playoff hunt. They may try to add some other pieces to keep them in that playoff hunt. Buffalo. Oh, Buffalo. It's so sad to see Buffalo go through this year. I had high hopes, and it just hasn't happened. They're still below NHL 500, so I think Buffalo has to be a seller. Montreal is selling, and I think that's great. I think that even though they've stayed close enough to that playoff hunt that there's some decisions to be made there about, hey, maybe we could stay the course, but selling off Monahan, which is an agreement they had with him, that's great. That's great for Monahan. He gets a chance to go to play in Winnipeg, and Montreal gets an asset getting Monahan, and they get an asset flipping Monahan. That's some good asset management by Kent Hughes. Really, really smart play there. Minnesota. Minnesota's been re-signing guys, so I don't know how much there is left to sell. I'm going to put them under potential sellers. I don't know how much more there is there. Plus, Bill Guerin, the last time he was asked about it, said he still believes this team can make the playoffs. So I think at the deadline, we might see them sell if there's assets left to sell. Marc-Andre Fleury's name gets thrown around a lot. He has to be healthy and he has to be playing well, I think, for him to have that market value. Otherwise, he may end up staying in Minnesota the rest of the season. But yeah, for the Wild, I'm putting him under potential sellers because it does feel like the GM's not as likely to want to sell right away. Ottawa, sell. And this is where, for Steve Staios, we're going to find out what kind of GM he's going to be and how aggressive he's going to be as well. This is a good young core, but it hasn't worked. So you have to figure out which part of that good young core is maybe sellable at the deadline and what you want your team to look like going forward and how many players from that core you want to keep around. Columbus should be sellers at the deadline. Obviously, the Columbus Blue Jackets not having the kind of season they wanted to. They made blue line moves hoping to get better. It hasn't gotten better. So Kekalainen's on the hot seat a bit here, I would think. So he has to have a good trade deadline. If he can have a really good trade deadline, add a bunch of future assets, it may very well help protect his job. Anaheim's going to be selling. I thought this was neat too. So when I was being interviewed by the Ducks podcast, I believe I mentioned that I'd love to see Vetrano. I mentioned a video I'd love to see Vetrano playing for the Canucks at some point. And now all of a sudden I saw yesterday, hey, could Vetrano be a target for the Canucks? I hope so. I honestly hope so. I think Vetrano would be that perfect top six forward for them. But that being said, and that set aside, I think the Anaheim Ducks are sellers at the deadline. I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody. San Jose absolutely will be selling at the deadline as well. They've had a good run lately. What that good run has done for them is it has appreciated the value of some of those players. And so, yeah, like Zetterlund. Zetterlund to start the season wouldn't have had much value. Right now he would. And so we'll see which players end up leaving, which ones stay, and what the plan is going forward for the San Jose Sharks. Which leaves us with Chicago. Sell, sell, sell. What else is Chicago going to do? They're going for that number 1 draft pick yet again. Of course, they've been without Bedard for a while. And it's really shown how much they need him offensively. But at any rate, yeah, Chicago should be sellers as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that I view as being sellers at the deadline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, who I feel like should be buyers. I got 5 more potential buyers, so that's 14 teams bidding potentially with 9. And so it should be an interesting deadline. Because by my count, it's about a 50-50 split between ones that maybe should or could be buyers and ones that should stand pat or maybe potentially sell. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Which teams do you think should be buying at the deadline? And which team do you think should be most aggressive at the deadline in terms of trying to acquire assets with the vision of this right here, the Stanley Cup being raised in June by their team? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.